Well, hello again, this is Philip Steiger back from Europe, and this time I'd like to answer a question somebody had regarding the combination of animations with another animation, and particularly this feature here in the timeline editor called use anim as swap, using an animation as a swap buffer so that you can then go into this menu and select something like Displace by swap or Composite with sequence. Actually no, not that one, that's against the image file sequence, but there's a Composite with swap, and there's also another group to combine with swap, and any of these typically would use a swap buffer, which is a single image, but you can also instead use the whole image sequence that you saved initially as a swap, as an animation. So a DogWaffle animation DWA file. Let's have a look. You know, that might look something like this in the end. If you scrub through that, you can see here that there's multiple animations going on. Underneath it we have some sort of a Brownian motion. I think it's actually the purling noise. That purling noise I rendered into an animation and then saved it as the DWA that would then go and displace another animation, and we still see some parts of that other animation here. What I did in this case here is I combined them together. So I did a composite, I think, with the color keying. If I undo that, we'll see the original animation, and that's the one where I think we just had a sky animation before we displaced it. And if I quickly wait for that to come in, we'll just get a good idea, and then we'll go exactly do the same thing again, so we can actually really see step by step how to do that. So here's the animation with the sky moving, the clouds are moving, but it's also being subject to the displacement with the animation of the displacement map. Alright, so essentially what we deal with here is two animations. One is going to be something like this one here, where you have a purling noise, and you can control how many iterations you want on that, or how coarse you want it. There's different types of purling noise. Maybe we use one of those here today. Let's use this one. Let's make the scale a bit bigger, something like this, and the speed at which it will animate. Alright, so let's look at this one here. Let's look at this one, and let's go render that. Now we have an animation of 150 frames. Let's go redo that. Let's say we want, this time we want 200. So we'll do 200 frames. If that's all we need, let's go click that, and it initializes the animation based on the current frame, but it will override it when we go here with this guy. So here we'll have 200 total frames. Let's go render that. Here you go. So we have now animated noise, which is being rendered into our 200 frame animation sequence. This is going to act as the background. This is going to, as the displacement map, or as the composite map, or as the combined map. So this is the one that, instead of using the swap buffer single image, we will have the whole animation sequence as a swap buffer that is animated. Alright, so once we have this rendered, we need to save it so we can then select it as the animated swap buffer. Just a few more seconds. I have to apologize for my good old PC here. It's about 4 years old, not the fastest, not the latest, still one of the greatest. And I like to encourage it to keep chugging along. So give it some more RAM, give it some patience, and some TLC. Alright, so here we go. Here we have this animation now, which is some nice purling noise. And I want to eventually use it here, but I can't right now because I haven't saved it yet. So I need to go and do this, save it as the native animation file, and I'll call this use anim as swap number 2. There you go. So this is my swap buffer number 2. It's a DWA file, DogWaffle animation, and it saves this pretty quickly, especially if you have very fast drives, fast spinning drives, or solid state drives. This is a quick memory dump, basically, no compression. It's fairly large on the disk, but it's also very fast. Alright, so now we have this animation. We can now forget it, and we can go and create our new animation. Maybe you load that, maybe you have an image sequence, and it had better be the same dimension. That would be the ideal situation. Same dimension as the one we just did here. Width and height is what we call the dimension here. Now if you don't have an animation yet, you can create one, and we can create one of the same 200 frames. Right? So let's do that, and then go populate it with some sort of a image or an animation. Maybe we'll use the render in the filter. There's a couple here. There's the tunnel. There's a couple of animated ones. Let's take the render sky, and you see there's an animate button there, and we can select the look for the sky. We can select the color, and let's make it somewhat saturated blue with a little bit of a light blue tint to it. There you go. And then for the fog color, we'll give it something like a reddish tint. It's kind of a sunrise. There you go. For the gradient, we'll give it a nice color look there. Let's give the iterations a little bit more detail. And the phase, the heading, we can change and look in a different direction. Now we're ready to go with that, but we also want to animate it. So when we animate it, we have a couple of parameters here. You can say at what speed do they move along the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis, which is in this fractal space, basically going to change the shapes of the clouds. So I'm going to go a bit slowly this way, a little bit faster that way, and then change the shapes of the clouds really quickly. All right, so now I'm rendering a sky, right? So this basically is a replacement for a real video. If you had a video or something like a rendered in 3D animation program, you would go and load that either as an API file or as an image sequence. If you have an MP4, QuickTime, or other formats, you got to convert it to one of those formats that you can then stick into DogWaffle. That's quick and easy, and in this case we didn't have one to start from, so let's just go and render one that will act as our starter video. And again, we already have saved the other video, which is going to be used as a animated displacement map. Alright, so here's our video, and the clouds are moving. Maybe we want them to move in the opposite direction, so we can go here under the frames in the animation menu and say reverse frames. And so now they're moving in the opposite direction. But also one thing you see is they change shapes really quickly, because we had the Z space change as well. And maybe we want a little bit more contrast on that. Let's go to the image menu and select expand dynamic range. You'll see that will look better, and we can apply that to the whole animation. You could also do all sorts of other things now with the timeline editor, and perhaps you'd like to give it even more value adjust here. Perhaps a little bit more contrast, a little bit less contrast, gamma, darkness, whatever you want. Let's not do that. What we'll do instead is now jump right to this part here at the bottom, where we have a couple of options to use this image with something that's in a swap buffer. Now normally you would go with green, blue, or color keying if you do the composite, or a little bit further up here you got the combining. And any of these will produce different results, but they will be affected by what image you actually have in the swap buffer. However, in this case we don't want to use just this one image from the swap buffer. Instead, we will use the animation and say use an animation as a swap buffer. Okay, that's the magic right there. So it's going to ask us, well, which animation do we want? Let's use this one we just created and saved a few minutes ago. Right? So from now on we can actually go and do combinations. And you see it right there. Here's that noise, the plasma noise, and as you combine it, it will combine and run through the animation at the same time. Displace by swap is a cool one here. That's really useful if you want to make it look like you're in a hot desert and the air is rising and you get a lot of turbulent refraction, distortions, and that sort of thing. So you increase here the amount of distortion or displacement. Maybe if you're looking through the exhaust from a jet plane and the animation is actually moving sideways, that displacement will show really nicely here. So you see right here on the right side the original image sequence, right? And then over here you see what the filter does when we have the animation going through the swap buffer coming on from an animation. And you can simply render that right here. You can in fact even keyframe it. You can say initially no distortion. So let's go right from the first right here and keyframe that, and then perhaps by here we have maximum displacement. That's a lot, but why not? And then here we'll keep it all the way through that, and then here at the end we'll reduce it back to 0 distortion. So we now have, in fact we can make that a linear transition, or we can toggle that to a spline or Bezier transition, and let's go and render that. So now what it's doing, it's rendering the animated displacement map with increasing force. As you see here, the maximum displace is being increased through the keyframes, and eventually we reach the maximum displacement. You can barely see what clouds or whatever original image was back there. This animation now is being fully distorted. And that's all there is to this. It's a great little tool. Quite a bit of magic you can do with that, because you can combine various types of images with various type of other images, right? I mean, an animation is essentially a sequence of images for us. And you can combine one against another, combine it, displace it, composite it, all sorts of different things you can do with that. Here's the first one where we used the displacement, and when we play it now, you see on the right side here that there's a lot of distortion, a lot of displacement of that image of the moving skies, but not through the entire animation. Towards the end, it goes back down and levels off, right? Because remember, we had the keyframes there going. So at the beginning, we didn't do any distortions, then we keyframed it to a lot of displacement, and then towards the end, it came back down to no distortion. It's an easy way to make a little bit of a looping scenario, although it still jumps from the last frame to the first frame. And that's something you can fix too, by the way. There is right-click here. You can do a make loopable, which will fade some of the last frames against some of the same number of first frames, and so you get a nice little transition there. Before we do that though, let's do another one. We still have this animation going here, use anim as swap. What we'll do this time is composite that, or let's say composite with swap, and this time we'll use the color key. So you can actually go here and select what color you want to use. You just drag around here and you find it with a certain margin. You can adjust the low clip, you can adjust the high clip, and that's pretty neat because it kind of opens a band in between, in this case, where you can say show me the actual swap buffer underneath it. The swap buffer being the animated swap buffer, because we still have the animation used as swap. So you can actually see the video through this gap, through this opening, and that can lend itself to really great visual effects as well. You know, you can change the coloring here for the keying. You can have it tighter, you can have it looser, and you can just grab the color right here from the thumbnail. And let's go and render that. And that will basically now bring it to the level we had at the very beginning of this presentation, where we actually saw the remnants of the original image with the displaced image, and then we also see through it the displacement map itself, because of that compositing with a little bit of tolerance to see through it. Now, so that's a very general technique. I hope this gives you some ideas of stuff to try. Use it with real videos, you know, combine it with some real footage that you have from a video camera or from your cell phone that you save it out to an MP4 or a MOV, convert it to AVI or export it, save it as an image sequence. Maybe you use Poser or you use Carrara or some other 3D animation program for walk sequences or just architectural walkthrough. Any of that stuff is really great to experiment with, and then take it in, add some displacement map, save that as a DWA, and use it as the swap buffer for your displacement, for your compositing, for your combining with the original. And with that you'll create some rather abstract art, and that is of course animated art in this case. Alright, hope this was useful for you, and come back and see us again in another daily dose.